Good morning, class. This is our lecture on proteins. Proteins are absolutely vital to our body and serve many functions. So we're going to talk about proteins today. All right, proteins are composed of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and what makes proteins different from carbs. Excuse me, I just yawned the first slide of your lecture. What makes proteins different from carbs or fats is that they have nitrogen atoms. And nitrogens are key to protein structure. Some amino acids also have sulfur in them, and perhaps you know what sulfur smells like. It's not necessarily the most pleasant smell, but some proteins do have a sulfury smell. Proteins are arranged into amino acid links. So proteins are actually made of something called amino acids, and we're going to talk about exactly what amino acids are, but proteins are combinations of multiple amino acids. All right, so amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and there are 20 important amino acids for humans. Amino acids are named for their chemical structure because the nitrogen containing group is actually called an amine or an amino. So again, you see chemistry playing a role in how we name these nutritional compounds. Amino acid structure. So all amino acids have a similar yet different structure. All amino acids have this amino group, which is the NH4. All amino acids have this acid group because they're called amino acids. All amino acids have a hydrogen group. However, what's different between amino acids is what we call this R group or this side chain. And this R group can be anything. In the simplest amino acid, it's hydrogen. In a slightly more complex amino acid, it is this methyl group. So this R group here is what differentiates one amino acid from another. For example, glycine is an amino acid. L-alanine is a different amino acid because of its structure. Here are the 20 amino acids, and they can be categorized into essential amino acids versus non-essential amino acids. Non-essential amino acids can be synthesized by our body as long as we have kind of the right building blocks for them. However, essential amino acids we cannot synthesize, so we need to get these from our diet. All right, how are you going to remember the essential amino acids versus the non-essential amino acids? There are many different mnemonics that you can use. Mnemonic is like an abbreviation. One example, this might sound very weird, but it's using the first few letters of the amino acids or even the first letter to hint to you what it might be. So one example of a mnemonic is Luc, L-E-U-C, for leucine. Luc lies there in pain, in very much pain this time. So you're probably thinking, how did you get that from that? You do have to be a little bit creative. But that might help you remember at least the first letters of some of these essential amino acids. All right, conditionally essential amino acids. It is possible for an amino acid that's not usually essential to become what's called conditionally essential, meaning you're having trouble making it. And what happens, or an example of this, is phenylalanine and tyrosine. Phenylalanine is essential. Tyrosine is usually considered not essential because as long as we have phenylalanine, we can make tyrosine. However, in a very, very rare amount of our population, they have a genetic disorder called phenylketonuria. And in phenylketonuria, they can't break down phenylalanine and convert it to tyrosine. So they actually end up with two issues. First of all, the phenylalanine builds up to toxic levels. And second of all, the tyrosine becomes essential because they're not able to convert it from foods that they have eaten and from sources of phenylalanine. So they need to eat tyrosine sources of food. They can't convert it from phenylalanine. Peptide bond. A peptide bond is the bond that holds two amino acids together, and there could be multiple peptide bonds to form a long protein chain. In this particular example, there's just two. You can see that the peptide bond is a condensation reaction, the forming of the peptide bond, because water is lost. And if you wanted to break a peptide bond, it would be a hydration reaction where water is gained. These bonds are pretty strong. However, they can be broken down by acid, enzymes, and chemical digestion in our body. Protein synthesis. So protein synthesis begins with DNA, and DNA serves as coded instructions for how to make our proteins. So DNA gives us instructions for which amino acids to assemble to which amino acids, in which order, how long, what amount, etc. That's a very, very brief description of DNA in a nutshell. And DNA is contained in the nucleus of the cells. Another way to think of DNA as kind of the cookbook to make the proteins. It tells you what the recipe is, meaning how much of each amino acid should be used and in which order. And the first part of protein synthesis is formation of a polypeptide chain, which a polypeptide chain is a chain of multiple peptide bonds that, if you can think about the name, includes many amino acids. So first, DNA will code for polypeptide chains, which are these long strands of amino acids. And then those amino acid strands can actually twist and fold and bend and form additional bonds between the amino acids, additional besides peptide bonds, to obtain a protein structure. So DNA ultimately determines what protein shape we have. All right. So there are 4 ways to describe protein structure. And to begin with, there is primary structure, which is the sequence of amino acids or the polypeptide chain, which amino acids are in that polypeptide chain. Secondary structure is when that polypeptide chain begins to fold and twist. And this is determined by weak electrical attractions within the polypeptide chain, for example, hydrogen ions. And secondary structures can be helixes or pleated sheets. Tertiary structures are what's described as polypeptide tangles, where the complexity of the folds and the twists is much greater, and you actually get quite a developed structure. And then quaternary structure involves associations and reactions between multiple tertiary structures. So an example, hemoglobin is actually made up of 4 small tertiary structures of proteins, and when they bond together, they're able to hold iron inside. In this example, you can see hemoglobin and a normal red blood cell. This is a red blood cell. It's able to carry oxygen because of its shape. It's able to move very easily through our bloodstream. However, if there are errors in DNA synthesis of protein, even just a single amino acid, what can happen is something called sickle cells. And so just one single error in protein design can cause the protein structure to be significantly different. And we're going to see this on the next slide coming up. So here you can see that a normal hemoglobin protein has this sequence right here, and these 3-letter abbreviations indicate individual amino acids. So this is a normal hemoglobin. However, in sickle cell anemia, instead of this GLU, you have a VAL, which is valine. And that one single change completely changes the structure of the entire molecule. And then the problem with this is these sickle cell-shaped blood cells can't carry oxygen. They can get stuck within the bloodstream, they can clump, they can become very painful, they can lead to shortness of breath, exhaustion, and ultimately can actually even lead to death. So here is peptide structure and protein structure in a little bit easier to see form. So here you have one big polypeptide here, and you can see it's kind of bent a little bit, and then you have a second polypeptide here, and they are interacting or connecting and folding with these sulfur bonds, which are considered disulfide bridges. So we mentioned that sulfur can be in some of these amino acids, and sulfur actually forms bridges that influence the protein's ultimate shape. So this protein happens to be insulin, which is a very, very important hormone for regulating blood sugar. This is the hemoglobin protein, and here you can see that there are 4 different tertiary structures, and together they form one big quaternary structure that is able to hold the iron and carry the oxygen. Protein sources. So I know we're not in class right now, but I want you to think of some plant protein sources. I think people often think of protein sources just coming from animals, but they really don't. They come from plants around us as well. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about these. Okay, it was a very fast minute since we're online, but I just wanted to give you some examples in case you couldn't think of any. Beans, kidney beans, lima beans, navy beans, black beans, garbanzo beans, soybeans, nuts, almonds, cashews, peanuts, hazelnuts, walnuts, pecans, pistachios, black-eyed peas, split peas, spinach, broccoli, quinoa, whole wheat, oats, rye, barley, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, yeast. These are just a few of the examples. In the US, most of our protein comes from animal sources. However, worldwide, most protein comes from plant sources. These are some pictures of plant proteins. Here you've got seeds in this beaker, you've got nuts in the middle, and then you've got some legumes and lentils. Seeds usually have 6 to 10 grams of protein per serving. Legumes usually have 5 to 10 grams per serving, and nuts, depending on which nut, might have 4 to 8 grams per serving. These are some additional protein sources. These are grains that perhaps you haven't even tried or wouldn't think of. Some of these are considered ancient grains, but here we have kamut, quinoa, farro, millet, froren, teff, and rye. Vegetable sources. Cauliflower, 40% protein, spinach, 49% protein, asparagus, cabbage, parsley, kale, broccoli here is 45% protein. So these are all really good vegetable sources of protein. Nutritional yeast. This actually has 4.8 grams of protein per tablespoon. So some people like to add this to different foods they're eating, such as salads. Animal sources of protein. I think these are the more obvious sources of protein, but we've got dairy sources, we've got poultry, just chicken, turkey, pheasant, game hen. We've got seafood, we've got fish, and then I have some alternative ones coming up. The consumption of animal products has actually declined in the United States. So this is a good trend. We still do eat a lot of animal products, but our consumption of total animal products as well as beef has gone down. However, worldwide, this is actually the opposite. And worldwide, people have been eating almost twice as much animal protein than they used to. There are a lot of benefits to either avoiding animal protein or limiting your animal protein, which we're going to talk about coming up. Here's some pictures of a protein source you might not have thought of. So how do you feel about bugs? Globally, over 3 billion people actually eat bugs or include bugs as part of their diet. And it's estimated that about 30% of the world eats bugs. So why would you eat bugs? First of all, bugs are very, very sustainable. They require lower levels of food to feed them. So per gram of bug protein, you don't have to feed them that much food. They have 12 times less food than a cow, for example. They produce less greenhouse gases. They require less space for feeding. All right, so how can you eat these bugs? Lots of people eat these bugs barbecued. People eat these bugs dried. With crickets specifically, they do cricket flour. So they have ground the crickets up into protein component, and you can cook with it. You could make smoothies with it. It's in protein bars. An additional benefit you can get from eating these bugs versus other animal sources of protein is you actually get quite a bit of fiber. If you think of kind of the shell or the body of the bug, usually the bugs are ground up whole. So you actually get a lot of fiber. And some of these bugs also contain omega-3 fatty acids. So don't be shy. Give the bugs a try. I encourage you to look for these products when you're out and about. I think Trader Joe's does have some. I know Whole Foods has some. I know Lassen's has some. Once in a while grocery outlet has some of these products. So check them out. Other protein foods. So People often use supplements, powders, bars, and drinks, and we're going to see those coming up. These are some non-animal based protein foods. Here you see seitan, which is actually like a washed wheat product and mostly contains the gluten part of the wheat. You see a Boca burger, which is a vegetarian meatless burger. On the far right, you see tempeh, which is a fermented soy food. And then you have this Bob's Red Mill TVP. This is textured vegetable protein, which is usually made up of soy. And something like the TVP could be added to tomato sauce or pasta sauce if you wanted to make like a spaghetti, but you didn't want to use beef or meat. It could be added to tacos. It really could be added to anything that you would usually put ground beef in or ground meat in. Protein supplements. So these are primarily used by athletes and dieters, but I know protein bars are getting really popular, and I think often the average person probably has eaten a protein bar, in their lifetime for sure. They're pretty convenient. You can eat them on the go. Generally speaking, I think these products are okay, as long as you're not greatly exceeding your daily protein needs, because there's really not benefit from that. All of these products that I have shown do have a mixture of amino acids, and that's good because our body does better when we get a variety and a mixture of amino acids. Our body is actually not very good at absorbing singular amino acids when you get them in these supplement forms, because some of them are kind of chemically similar and use the same transporters. So if you consume them in high amounts, they can actually build up and be quite toxic. In Canada, selling single amino acids is actually banned. How much protein is in each food? Your textbook has some really good tables and references, as well as this website here. For example, milk, usually an 8-ounce cup of milk has 8 grams of protein. A 1-ounce serving of meat has 7 grams of protein. Vegetables, 2 grams of protein on average per serving, but some vegetables are also going to be a lot higher than this. And starches and grains on average 2 grams per serving. 1 ounce of meat, just to put it in perspective, is pretty small. Eggs are usually considered about an ounce, one single egg. So if you scramble just one single egg, a 3-ounce portion is considered average serving size for meat, but if you actually see a 3-ounce portion, it's pretty small. 3-ounce portion might be as big as a deck of cards or your cell phone or computer mouse. Protein allergies. So allergies occur when our immune system reacts to what it thinks is a foreign invader. And in the case of food allergies, some of the proteins in foods can be recognized as these foreign invaders. And then what happens is our body will form antibodies to them. Our body will elicit an immune response, which could include inflammation. It could even include anaphylaxis in the worst case. Anaphylaxis is where your blood vessels, your respiratory channels like your lungs, your bronchioles actually constrict, and you could have trouble breathing. So it could actually be very, very serious, where you would need to go to the hospital or take what's called epinephrine to kind of slow down that response. These are the most common allergens out there. There's 8 of them. There are peanuts and tree nuts, milk products, soy, wheat, eggs, fish, and shellfish. And usually with wheat, it's actually the gluten in the wheat that people are having the allergic reaction to. So what do recommendations depend on? Recommendations depend on kind of individuals and maintaining our healthy life, as well as being able to get enough protein to resynthesize any of the proteins our body needs for, say, immune cells, skin cells, hair cells, nail cells, cells of our GI tract are constantly being reproduced, red blood cells are being reproduced, maintaining our muscle, etc. So it can depend based on your age, your activity level, and your life state. For example, a woman who is pregnant would need more protein than a woman who is not pregnant. So here we go. Age, physical activity, life stage, and then other circumstances. If you are sick, if you have an illness, an injury, a burn, or an infection, your body relies on much more protein to regenerate some of those immune factors and cells. And say in the case that you had surgery, you actually have a wound, your body has to make new cells in order to help that wound close and heal. Physical activity can greatly affect protein intakes. Normal protein recommendation would be 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. However, with physically active individuals, they may need from 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight if they're doing strength training or high intensity activities. Protein balance. So we can look at protein balance as kind of protein intake and protein excretion. And when we excrete proteins, we are primarily excreting nitrogen. We're breaking it down into nitrogen, getting rid of nitrogen. So sometimes this might be considered nitrogen balance. In some life stages, your intake is less than your excretion. And in other life stages, your intake is more than your excretion. So positive protein balance happens during growth, pregnancy, recovery after illness, and athletic training. Negative protein balance happens when you're not eating enough protein, and you have inadequate calorie intake, you're sick, maybe you have a fever, a burn, infection, and you have increased protein loss. So in negative protein balance, you can see that this protein is on a scale, and when it's balanced, it's equal, but in negative protein balance, protein excretion is bigger than protein intake. In positive, sorry, I sneezed. In positive protein balance, protein intake is heavier or bigger than protein excretion. So this should actually kind of be like this, because protein excretion here for negative is bigger than protein intake. So when you're sick or you're not eating enough, you're actually losing too much protein. RDA. So generally speaking, like I said, you need 0.8 grams per kilogram. And so if you think of an average body weight for men, women, and children, this is about how many grams of protein they would need each day. How much protein do you need? So you're not going to be turning this in for class participation since this is online, but I do want you to do this because you could have a question like this on one of your tests where I said a person weighs 70 kilograms. How much protein would you recommend they get daily? So what you would do is you would multiply the weight, 70 kilograms, by 0.8, and that would tell you how much protein they need. So does this surprise you? Do you think you're meeting your needs? Are you eating too much or too little? I guess I could do an example for you here. I'll do it on myself. So I weigh about 135 pounds, which is about 61.3 kilograms. And so to find out how much protein I need, I multiply this by 0.8 grams per kilo. Sorry, this pen is slow to write. And what I get is 49 grams of protein a day. So then I could look at food sources that I'm eating and compare it to see how much I'm eating versus how much is recommended or needed for me. If I was being more physically active, these needs could go up. If I was sick, these needs could go up. All right, what else should you consider when thinking about protein sources? I think nutrition is an important consideration. This is nutrition class after all. So I think looking at what else is in that protein food is really beneficial. Plant sources of protein do have a lot of fiber. They often have a lot of vitamins and minerals. They might have phytochemicals such as anthocyanins or resveratrols, and these are chemical compounds found in plants that have additional benefits to our health. Some of them work as antioxidants or anti-inflammatories. Animal products usually have cholesterol. They usually have saturated fat, and some animal products might have sodium if it's like a deli meat or a processed meat. Cheese has a lot of sodium. Cottage cheese has a lot of sodium. Ham has a lot of sodium. And they may have additional preservatives, food colorings, etc. So you have to read the labels and really know all of what you're getting before you can make educated choices. Other considerations for protein foods. What about the environmental impact? So if we think about environmental impact, we have to think about the cost environmentally of producing the food. So using the water to feed the animal, using the water to water the crops that then feed the animal, the land that the animal is on, the methane output the animal has. This is from animal gas and animal poop. Methane is a greenhouse gas, and so it actually breaks down our I can't think of the word now. It breaks down our atmosphere. Sorry, I can't think of the word. Pause for a minute. All right. Sorry, I had to look it up. The ozone layer. I can't believe I couldn't think of that. But the greenhouse gases, the methane that the cows, the beef, the pork, animals put off actually can deplete our ozone layer. And the ozone layer is what protects us from UV radiation, etc. It also holds in heat to our planet. So as we have kind of damaged our ozone layer over time, our Earth is experiencing things like global warming. So animal foods that we choose actually do contribute to global warming. Ethical implications. How do you feel about how livestock is raised, treated, slaughtered, etc.? And then cost. Generally speaking, animal sources of protein are more expensive than plant sources of protein. What about high protein diets? So high protein diets are okay if they are eaten by athletes who are actually using that protein to build muscle. However, most people in the US consume way more than they need as far as protein, and there is some thought that this could be concerning. Even in athletes who are building muscle, high protein diets can kind of stress out the kidneys and increase urine output. And for an athlete, if they're increasing their urine output, they could actually become dehydrated. So athletes have to be really careful to consume enough water, especially on high protein diets. Otherwise, they could be dehydrated. There are links between red meats red meats and cancer, specifically colon cancer. Red meat is considered a carcinogen in instances of colon cancer. There are also likely risks to breast cancer, and CVD is cardiovascular disease. High intakes of meats, proteins might cause calcium to be lost in the urine. Calcium comes from our bones, and so we do not want calcium to be lost in our urine. We'd like to keep calcium in our bones. And so it is potential that high protein diets can be dangerous and really have no benefit, just more risk. Looking at protein quality. So protein quality can be assessed by a couple of different methods. And we want to look at protein quality because protein quality tells us how well our body can use the proteins that we eat. So the protein quality determines how well children grow and how well adults maintain their health. Generally speaking, the reference protein that we use to compare other proteins to is a high quality protein food that has all of the essential amino acids required for preschool age children. Because you think if you can meet the needs of a preschool age child who is growing and developing, preschool age children are usually very active, then in an adult, this amount of protein would definitely be enough. Adults are no longer, growing physically tall. They are just replenishing their own protein supplies. Adults obviously can increase muscle, but they're not growing as the way children are growing. All right, so protein digestibility. This is how well we can actually use the amino acids that we eat from protein sources and reassemble them to proteins we need in our body. And it can depend based on what source of protein we eat. Most plant proteins are very digestible, most animal proteins are very digestible, 90 to 99%, and plant proteins are 70 to 90% digestible. It also depends on if we eat protein with other foods, or if we eat protein alone. Reference protein. So I talked about the reference protein as being this protein that supplies all of the essential amino acids necessary for preschool age child's needs, growth, and development. And because preschool children are growing so rapidly, this amount of protein would definitely be enough for an adult. And what we use as our reference protein is egg, because egg actually is very digestible and it contains all of the amino acids we need in very close proportions to how the body needs them. High quality proteins. So high quality proteins have all of the essential amino acids in similar amounts that we require. Animal and plant proteins differ in their proportions of these essential amino acids. Soy and quinoa do have all of the essential amino acids in proportions very close to what humans need. So these are very, very high quality plant proteins. All plant proteins do have all of the essential amino acids. However, some plant proteins don't have some of these essential amino acids in high amounts for humans. Most animal proteins do have the essential amino acids and in similar amounts that people need. However, gelatin is the only animal protein that does not, and it it is low in one of the essential amino acids. So gelatin is an incomplete animal protein. You can eat a variety of plant proteins to get all of the essential amino acids you need. And our body actually has a pool of protein where we kind of store proteins for use. So if we're eating a diet that maybe was low in something, we could draw from that pool. Limiting amino acid. So when you're looking at different protein sources, I mentioned already that some proteins are low in certain amino acids. And if you're working on protein synthesis, putting together long chains of polypeptides, multiple amino acids, and you run out of one you need, that could be limiting. It's like you're building like a Lego model and you run out of blue Legos all of a sudden. But you need blue Legos because they go in the next step of your Lego model. You have to stop and then go buy some blue Legos or go to the store or take them from another kit. So in some proteins, there are low in certain amino acids, and this can it could halt protein synthesis, but since we do have this protein pool in our body, we can usually draw from that pool. However, it's possible that it could slow down protein synthesis. Complementary proteins. So I mentioned that some proteins can be low in certain amino acids, and the concept of complementary proteins says, well, let's combine proteins that are low in different amino acids so that when we eat them together, we get all of our amino acids. This is actually kind of an outdated concept because I've been talking about this amino acid pool and the fact that if we are missing one of our amino acids, our body can actually draw from our own pool of amino acids. And we don't necessarily have to eat these complementary proteins together or at the same meal. As long as we're eating a variety of foods, we're going to get them throughout the day or throughout the week. So some examples of this concept, even though it is a slightly outdated concept, it is still pretty prevalent, and so I'll let you know what it is anyways. Seeds and grains, seeds and dairy, legumes and seeds, legumes and dairy, dairy and grains. And this is a chart showing different foods and which amino acids they have a lot of compared to which amino acids they're low in. And then you can see why the concept of combining them is kind of, in theory, would make sense. However, it's not absolutely necessary. So legumes are high in isoleucine and lysine, but they're low in methionine and tryptophan. Grains are low in isoleucine and lysine, but they're high in methionine and tryptophan. So if you were to eat these together, for example, rice and beans, you would be getting all of these essential amino acids. But like I said, the thought that you have to eat these at the same exact meal is no longer really true. We know that our body can pull from other sources. Protein denaturation. So this is when we are actually breaking down proteins. And in order to digest and absorb proteins, we have to denature them. Denaturing means taking these complex protein molecules, unfolding them, and then eventually splitting them into singular amino acids. We have many enzymes that help with protein digestion. Also, our stomach can help with protein digestion. If we're not eating, cooking our food, or before we eat, not if we're not eating, but before we eat, cooking our food actually helps with protein denaturation. So cooking can denature proteins. High heat can denature proteins. Agitation can denature proteins. If you've ever whipped egg whites and formed those peaks, that actually is a protein denaturation where you're changing the shape of the proteins. Acids like our stomach acid or even lemon or lime juice can denature proteins. If you've ever made ceviche, which is like a dish made with raw fish or raw shrimp, lemon or lime juice, tomato, onion, sometimes cilantro, you marinate the meat in lemon or lime juice, which is acidic, and it does start to break down the proteins and actually do this kind of acidic cooking of them. Digestion. So digestion happens in the stomach with stomach acid, hydrochloric acid. We also have pepsin, which can break down long protein chains into amino acids. And then smaller proteins will move into the small intestine, and the pancreas will release additional digestive enzymes. Amino acids in our small intestine are taken up into our intestinal cells. They are water soluble, so they can travel through our circulatory system, and they go to the liver where they are used depending on what our body needs them for. This is digestion start to finish. So we would probably actually start with cooking, but then we would chew our food. That helps break it down, increase its surface area. So when it gets to our stomach, more of those proteins can be contacted by our stomach acid. Then proteins can go to our small intestine where the pancreas will secrete proteases that can help break down proteins further. Ones in the small intestine, they trigger the release of the hormone CCK, and CCK is what causes the pancreas to release some of these enzymes. So in the small intestine is really where the proteins are broken down. Then they travel across the intestinal cells into our circulatory system and go to the liver. We have a lot of proteins in our body, and it is our genes and our DNA that code for our proteins. So it's our genetic code that allows us to make all of these proteins. Roles of protein. So roles of protein are really, really important, and they're really crucial to life. Amino acids are the building materials for all the proteins in our body, and most of our body, or a lot of our body, is actually kind of in a state of constant breakdown. If you think about your skin, you're always regenerating skin cells. The entire lining of your GI tract is constantly rebuilding and regenerating itself. You're shedding actually cells from your GI tract into the intestinal wall. Immune cells, those have a very short life. Red blood cells, those have a life of about 100 days. And so protein turnover, they call it, is the process where a cell responds to its environment by producing the proteins that we need, breaking down the proteins that we don't, and then using the parts of those proteins to make more proteins that we need. So proteins are used as enzymes, hormones. They help maintain fluid balance. They help maintain acid and base in our blood. They could be transporters across membranes, antibodies, and we can use proteins for energy, as well as making glucose, gluconeogenesis, but that is kind of at the bottom because it's not exactly what we want to use our proteins for. Proteins serve as structures of our body. Here you see collagen matrix. This can actually be parts of bones in our body, connective tissues such as tendons, ligaments, foundations of bones and teeth, even scar tissue is made of protein. So this is really important. Proteins as hormones. This is just a few hormones that are proteins: growth hormone, insulin and glucagon, thyroid hormone, calcitonin, parathyroid hormone, and antidiuretic hormone, all made with proteins. Fluid balance. So proteins help maintain fluid balance, and this works in in combination with blood pressure. All right, so we're talking about protein and fluid balance. So proteins are very large and they have trouble actually like moving out of these tiny little capillaries in our blood, but proteins attract water and hold water in. So in that way, protein is very good at holding fluid in our bloodstream. If we're not eating enough protein, the concentration of protein in our bloodstream falls, and then that protein isn't holding fluid in, and fluid can leak out of the bloodstream and build up in the surrounding tissues. This is due to differences in blood pressure. As fluid accumulates in the tissues swell, like in this picture of this foot, and something called edema occurs. And edema itself isn't harmful, but it could be evidence of an underlying problem. This is another picture of somebody who has pretty severe edema. So when somebody has edema, there's literally just fluid floating around in their extracellular space outside of the cells. And if you push your finger into somebody's leg, for example, it stays indented. It doesn't bounce back. Acid-base regulation. So proteins help balance acid and base levels within our body fluids, and this is important to maintaining a normal pH, which is between 7.35 and 7.45. Proteins in the cell can pump ions in and out of the cell, and the ion concentration that results from this pumping action keeps the blood slightly alkaline, which is a little bit basic. Also, proteins can act as buffers. Proteins as antibodies. This is a picture of a protein as an antibody. And an antibody is a giant protein molecule that is specifically designed to combat a certain antigen or certain invader to our bloodstream. Proteins as energy source. Protein can yield 4 calories per gram, and protein can be used to make glucose through gluconeogenesis. So this would happen in a case where you are not consuming enough carbohydrate to make glucose from carbohydrates or to get glucose from carbohydrates. Proteins and satiety. Proteins make you feel very full compared to carbs and fats. Proteins will keep you more full after a meal, and this can help control overall food intake. So for people who are trying to lose weight, most experts recommend that they eat protein at every meal to help keep them more satiated or satisfied. Protein calorie malnutrition. This is very, very sad. This could happen in the United States, but is more of an issue globally. It's possible for people to have protein malnutrition or calorie malnutrition, or both protein and calorie malnutrition. So I just said they could have protein, energy, or both. There are 2 different types of this malnutrition, and they include marasmus and kwashiorkor. This is common in alcoholics because most alcoholics are getting the majority of their calories from the carbs in alcohol, and they're not eating protein foods, and it's common in developing countries. This puts people at higher risk for infection, disease, muscle loss, weakness, tiredness, lethargy, and even death in some cases. So the first type of protein calorie malnutrition is kwashiorkor, and this is when calories are not met. So overall calories are very low, but they do still get a little bit of protein. So they do have a little tiny bit of protein. It's not enough, but it's a little bit. And in Ghana, this word means the disease the first child gets when the new child comes. And what this indicates is that usually children are breastfed. However, when a new child is born, that new child is going to be the one who's breastfed, and the older child is not going to have that nice, nutritious milk anymore. So usually the older child ends up eating plant sources of foods, which are usually high in fiber, not super high in calories, and can lead to malnutrition. What else happens? This can cause diarrhea, failure to grow, failure to thrive, weight loss, withdrawal, malnutrition, and like I said, even death. If this child is caught early enough and you do an intervention where you give them protein and calories, this can be reversed. Marasmus. This is when there is not enough protein and not enough calories. And really, this is just a total starvation. So in these cases, victims, unfortunately, are just wasting away. They have the skin and bones appearance. They don't have subcutaneous fat. And this can happen in babies who aren't breastfed, or babies who stop breastfeeding early when there's bad sanitation and breastfeeding alternatives aren't available, when weaning happens too early, or just in cases of famine when there is no food. These are some pictures of the two and comparing the two. In kwashiorkor, you can see that this baby does have a tiny bit of subcutaneous fat, and they have this bloating of the belly. Remember, we talked about protein and holding in fluid. So when the baby has not enough protein and calories, the fluid can seep out into the extracellular space, and sometimes they get these bloated bellies. Babies with kwashiorkor also develop fatty livers, which can cause this kind of bloated look. Marasmus, the babies are just skin and bone because unfortunately they're literally starving. Vegetarian diets. So vegetarian diets are great. There are many benefits to vegetarian diets. Longevity, lower risk of diabetes, obesity, heart disease, regular bowel movements, getting all the great antioxidants, phytochemicals, phytonutrients, and fiber from plants. And vegetarian diets are quite on a spectrum. Some vegetarians eat milk and eggs, even dairy. Some vegetarians eat fish. And then on the more extreme side of vegetarian diet, there are vegans who don't eat or consume any animal products. Okay, why a vegetarian diet? So again, I know that this is online and you don't have a partner or neighbor, but if you had to convince somebody about why to have a vegetarian diet, what would you say to them? I think there's a lot of really good reasons to have a vegetarian diet, but how would you convince them to do this, to eat less meat? Adding veggies to your diet. There are so many ways to add veggies. Here you see a simple pasta salad, but they've added yellow bell peppers, green bell peppers, red bell peppers, beans, corn, and it's just full of vegetables, fiber, and color. Types of vegetarians, you can read about these more in your book. Like I said, there's a very big spectrum. Planning vegetarian diets. Vegetarian diets can absolutely be adequate for all life stages. However, some nutrients are more likely to be lacking in vegetarian diets if they're not planned well. So protein, calcium, B12, this comes from animal products, vitamin D, usually fortified in milk. So if somebody's not consuming milk and not out in the sun a lot, zinc and iron. So these are nutrients of concern that you would want to carefully and creatively plan a vegetarian diet to ensure you're getting enough of. And there are more tips in your book for exactly how to meet these needs. All right. Okay, class, I know that was a long lecture. I know there were a few pauses in that lecture. I'm experimenting with a new recording system and it didn't go exactly as planned. So I apologize for that. I apologize. I could not remember the name of ozone. I can't believe that. Anyways, I hope you did learn a lot about proteins. I hope you made it through the lecture. I'm sorry it was long, and I will try to have less interruptions in the next one. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it, and I promise it will benefit you. And enjoy some nice healthy protein.